From prison to palace. Before this story, we learned about Joseph's faithfulness in prison. His gifts for interpreting dreams was shown to Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker in the prison. He showed them kindness and interpreted their dreams. The cupbearer was restored to his position with Pharaoh, but the baker was hanged. The cupbearer forgot Joseph's kindness, and Joseph continued as a prisoner. Now we learn about Joseph finally being brought out of prison to help Pharaoh, and Joseph's ascent to power, inspired by the book of Genesis. 2 whole years had passed, and Joseph continued to faithfully serve in the prison. That night he prayed to God again, hoping one day he would be delivered. Miles away, in the dead of night, Pharaoh writhed in his bed. His eyes could be seen moving beneath his eyelids, and beads of sweat dripped from his furrowed brow. Vivid images splashed around his mind. He dreamed he was standing beside the Nile River. Out of the water climbed out 7 cows, attractive, plump, and well-fed. Coming from behind them, 7 sickly and ghastly cows emerged, crawling out from the river. Pharaoh watched as the 7 sickly cows violently devoured the healthy cows. The Nile filled with blood, and Pharaoh awoke screaming. Pharaoh sat up in his bed. His short breaths could be heard cutting through the silence like a razor blade. He calmed himself and slowly drifted back to sleep. Pharaoh found himself immersed in a dream once again. Only this time, he was by an empty field. Brilliantly, 7 ears of grain sprouted from the ground and shot into the sky. The grain was healthy and ripe. Pharaoh was enraptured by the grain's beauty, when all of a sudden, 7 more ears of blighted grain sprang up like weeds, choking out the healthy grains. The east wind blew as a tempest, and the hot air brought Pharaoh to his knees. He awoke in another panic. In the morning, he called all the magicians and wise men of Egypt to interrupt his dream. Yet they tried and failed. Pharaoh continued to be tormented by what he had seen, not sure why his heart and mind was consumed by fear. The chief cupbearer saw Pharaoh's troubled spirit, and it reminded him of the time he once was troubled with dreams. As he remembered this, his eyes widened and he gasped, saying, "Today I finally remember my offenses." He turned to Pharaoh and said, "When I was in prison with the baker, we both had dreams that concerned us. A young Hebrew was there serving, and he gave us each an interpretation that came true." Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. Joseph was shaved and given new clothes before being sent to Pharaoh. Joseph entered the palace doors, striding with the guards. The palace was more beautiful than he could ever have imagined. The halls were adorned with jewels, and the floors hewn from marble and alabaster. Ivory beams held up the ceiling, and in the center, sitting atop his throne, stood the most powerful man in the known world. "I have heard you can hear dreams and give their meaning," he said. His voice was deep, exuding power and nobility in each breath. Yet behind the powerful voice, Joseph could sense fear. He had compassion on Pharaoh. "It is not me. Dreams belong to God alone. He will give Pharaoh an answer," Joseph said. Pharaoh recounted his dreams to Joseph. Every detail and image was given to him. After he was finished speaking, Joseph sat silent for a moment. He looked up to the king and spoke with confidence. "Your dreams are one," Joseph said. "God has revealed to you his plans. The 7 good cows and the 7 good ears of grain represent 7 years of great plenty and flourishing. The 7 ugly cows and blighted grain represent 7 years of famine that will follow. The famine will wreak havoc and destruction if we are not prepared. It will consume the land." The news troubled Pharaoh, yet he remained silent. He looked at Joseph with concern beaming from his eyes. Joseph sensed this and spoke again with confidence. "You should select a wise man among you to take care of the land. Appoint overseers and take 1/5 of the produce you gain during the 7 good years. Store the grain and save it. Then, when the famine comes, you will have reserves for your land, so nobody perishes." Pharaoh's once exhausted face turned bright with hope. He stepped down from his throne to stand before Joseph. He was taller than he had imagined. He looked around the room to his advisors and said, "Can we find a man like this who has the Spirit of God?" He smiled and looked at Joseph. "Since your God has shown you all this, there is no one else better fit for the job. You shall be head over all my people, and they will all obey your command. Other than me, nobody will be greater. Listen and look. I have set you as head over all Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. Joseph was reminded of the robe his father once gave him. Pharaoh went into the city with Joseph, having him ride his 2nd chariot. As they passed through the city, people cried out, "Bow and kneel!" Pharaoh smiled and said to Joseph, "No one shall move without your consent. You are their leader." And Pharaoh renamed him Zaphenath-Paneah. And he gave him in marriage Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. Joseph once again found himself lifted from a pit into the blessings of God. Joseph ruled the land with the same care as Potiphar's house and the prison. Favor followed Joseph, and the entire country of Egypt was grateful for him. Joseph, the young man once rejected by his own brothers, found himself beloved by an entire nation.